this episode of ClevrChat, we're joined by Lauren Wilson, a passionate cybersecurity leader with over a decade of experience in the industry. Previously working for the National Cybersecurity Centre, Lauren has led the response to major cyber incidents and helped deliver critical systems that boosted the UK's ability to handle cyber threats at scale. Today, she leads cyber incident management, preparedness, and response in critical infrastructure. She's been recognised amongst the top 100 future CISOs by Hot Topics and is a standout voice in the next generation of cyber security leadership. Great to have you here with us, Lauren.
Thank you.
While you're in CSC, I'm sure you worked and helped many organisations build cybersecurity foundations. What do you think businesses with limited resources should prioritise when thinking about cyber incident management?
Yeah, really good questions. Like you say, with limited resources, prioritization is absolutely everything. But if you really strip back what cybersecurity is and consequently what incident management looks at, it's all about risk and risk reduction. Organizations of all sizes need to be really honest about where their risk sits, what systems, data, operations are truly business critical, trying to find those crown jewels within the organization and make sure that efforts to implement any cybersecurity is really focused on those areas. And once you know what matters, really building business continuity, incident management around those, and tirelessly asking the question, if the organization was to go back to ground zero, taken offline completely, what do you need to recover first in order for the business to survive and operate the critical services that would ensure that ultimately the impacts of a cybersecurity incident wouldn't see the kind of entire collapse of the organization and reputation. And having to think about that almost doomsday scenario really focuses clarity, especially conversations with leaders. But when it comes to incident management, I think it's remiss to think that organizations of a small scale should completely deprioritize cyber as a nice to have. It's what we're seeing cripples businesses when it really, really goes wrong. And if you've got less to lose, even a small cyber incident would see the collapse of an organization. So I think I choose governance, and regardless of the size of the organization, like I say, if governance to you looks like understanding roles and responsibilities for 4 people that come together in a cyber incident, or if that's a kind of more broader gold, silver, bronze type response, which I implement in large organizations, whilst I imagine kind of most people would think that I'd say something a bit more glamorous, like a technical response or having technical forensic toolkits. When it comes back to what's really, really important, unfortunately, it's not the glamorous stuff, it's structure of governance. And ultimately, that structure, when practiced and rehearsed, is critical for allowing quick, fast decisions with the right people in the right rooms when things are on fire. So yeah, if I had to prioritize one thing, it'd be their roles and responsibilities and the governance that you'd apply to an organization of any size, because that clarity and knowing who makes what decisions makes what could be quite a chaotic scramble into a better orchestrated response.
Absolutely. So, Lauren, you've been in the space for a while now. What have you seen often go wrong when it comes to cyber incident management, and where have you seen this work really well?
So again, it's not something glamorous. It's not something, deeply technical and whizzy. It's communication. That's where I see the key difference between an incident response success and not a failure, but not ideal incident response. And it's not just about, enough communication. It's about the right kind of communication at the right time to the right people. If you think about the 2 types of communication, I suppose internally first and then potentially externally. So you can often get too much noise in incident management communications, and that's most often what I see is the race to the top, when you've got people on the ground wanting to brief upwards to stakeholders, but doing it in a kind of a sporadic response. And that's when you get multiple people reporting to potentially the same leaders without any coordination, and it breaks process. It's really distracting, and ultimately as a leader it's confusing having potentially slightly different stories from multiple people. And I suppose the opposite of that is having too little information, and I see this with more so technical teams where they get their heads down and really focus on potentially forensics and investigations, and forget to brief upwards, and that creates quite a knowledge or information vacuum, and they fail to keep others in the loop. And the worst thing you want as a senior leader is to be brought in potentially too late or cold to a situation and then being asked to make quite critical decisions. So being briefed early with the right context helps decrease the confusion and decreases the risk ultimately, again, which is the most important thing we're trying to do in an incident response. So what works well, if too much is not good and too little isn't either. I think the balance that you'll find in the middle is that single source of truth stored in a centralized place where leaders can go, they know exactly what to expect, at what time, from whom. And even in the very start of an incident, I like to make sure that we communicate clearly. And that could just be at the very, very start of it. We're dealing with X, we know Y, we're investigating, and we'll get back to you when we have more. And just that very simple message to senior stakeholders just helps allay any fears that we've missed it or we know might not have seen it, or it gives them real clarity. The seniors really prefer that coordinated update. It's there, they know where to expect it and who's leading on the incident. And it really reduces the noise and ensures that timely updates are going to the right people. That's internally, and arguably that should be the easier one. When it comes to external communication, it's equally as important, if not more important, to get right, because the eyes of the world are on you, particularly if there's a national story breaking in the mainstream media about what's going on in your organisation. And I think the thing here is to get that balance between too little communication, which often makes you look a bit evasive, so if you've got something to hide, but also too much communication, being too honest too soon, can also have a detrimental effect, particularly if you're having to recant statements, go back on what you said, and it almost looks like you've lost control if you're having to go back on a previously given statement. So what works really well is ensuring that the comms team have pre-agreed lines that are signed off by internal stakeholders across cyber and press and senior stakeholders, so that there's a reactive message that is just a holding statement, most often just something to reassure that you're on the case, and gives you that breathing space to learn more information internally and then put that out at an appropriate time where the facts are a little firmer. As part of your external comms strategy, it's also important to engage both law enforcement and the National Cybersecurity Centre, but importantly, the ICO, if applicable, really early on in the process. And again, that can look like holding statements. Just knowing that something's happened is most often what they need to know in that critical first few hours. And while sometimes it's seen as another thing to do in a crisis response, actually the NCSC law enforcement can really, really help provide additional resources, additional analysis, and potentially even help you with some of those comms messaging. Particularly the NCSC, they can help disseminate that messaging from a single place, as opposed to you potentially being asked by multiple people for that same message.
Thanks, Lauren. We've spoken quite a lot about the reactive side of cyber incident management. Do you think that organisations underestimate how much practicing incident readiness actually matters in preparing them for a real incident?
Yeah, hugely. Again, like instant responses when it's gone wrong, right? We hope that you never have to. I mean, with a threat landscape, we always say a matter of when, not if, in terms of facing a significant cyber incident in an organisation. So readiness is vital, and particularly exercising. So it's the cyber equivalent of a fire drill. So imagine trying to evacuate a large office block for the first time with no training or no knowledge of where the fire exits were, or who was in charge, or what you should or should not be grabbing on your way out. It'd be absolute chaos, and that would be the same for an organisation who hadn't considered preparedness and really prioritised incident exercising. Because without the practice, it just becomes panic, and decisions can be delayed, responses are slower as a result of that, and that's where costly mistakes can happen. I don't think organisations should aspire or expect to mount a perfect response every single time, but rehearsing really helps get some of those key actions into muscle memory, so that when it does go wrong, the response becomes more coordinated and slightly calmer, as calm as you can be in a crisis. So it's really important that people are confident in the roles that they play in an incident, and that's why organizations need an exercising strategy. And that's because exercising can look quite different from different sizes of organization, given the complexity or potentially the federalized nature of decision making in an organization. So not just a one-off crisis exercise, but also exercising at the different layers. And I've implemented some exercising strategies in my career, and the ones that I found most effective is starting with senior leadership. So really, taking the exec board through a real scenario, a one that they recognize, systems that they recognize, business criticality informing the focus of the scenario. So they're seeing systems that they know are critical to the business and are going through what would be a worse day for them, a worse cyber day for them, looking at critical systems potentially being under attack. And that really helps focus the mind on what they do and do not have in place, which people they'd want in the room to make those decisions. And it really shows that it's not just a technical cybersecurity problem. When they see the systems and and they're talking about the business impact of those systems being down, it becomes a business continuity crisis response, and that has operational impact. It's not a technical problem. It's not the cybersecurity folk in their silos. This is, we're facing a organisationally critical incident that could jeopardise the reputation and the existence of an organisation. And then once you've kind of got that buy-in, and it's not about fear mongering, it's not about scaring the exec. Sometimes it has that byproduct, but it's definitely not the focus of it. It's opening their eyes to the reality of their roles and responsibilities in a cyber incident. And that then hopefully gives you the permission to move down the business in terms of the hierarchy, to engage other senior stakeholders in cyber incident exercising. And they're not just technical exercises that show where or where not the escalation paths exist, where stakeholder communication could be better, and which teams need to collaborate, and particularly with suppliers, what agreements are in place for support in an incident. Most organizations don't face any problem alone these days. They have vendors and managed services that they need to engage, and ensuring that they understand what is and isn't included in those contracts. You don't want to be learning that in the heat of an incident. Exercising is a way to retest what exists and where the knowledge sits within the organisation. And I suppose doing the exercise, like I say, is one vehicle for getting that awareness. But the most important thing out of an incident exercise is the actions that you take. I'd be shocked if anyone ever did a cyber exercise and they were like, nope, extremely perfect, nothing to see here, no improvements to be made. Every organisation should be coming away with actions for improvement, and those actions should be prioritised in improvement roadmaps, in cybersecurity programs, to make sure that what we are doing, the work that we are doing in cybersecurity, is aligned with the critical assets, but also any gaps that are realised in these scenarios.
Lauren, being an expert in your field, what's the one approach or best practice in cybersecurity industry that everybody believes in, but you yourself don't?
That's a really interesting question. So one thing I try and do is temper the kind of knee-jerk reaction that sometimes can happen when cyber makes the headlines. So it's great that cyber makes the headlines. I mean, not for the organizations involved, but for the industry as a whole. It's good that we're getting the kind of important light shone on how important cybersecurity is and the unfortunate consequences of when it goes wrong. And that really helps create real world examples of the profit losses and reputational damage that can happen as part of an incident. So whilst it's essential that we learn from incidents and we stay aware of the evolving threat that we see, it's really easy to focus too hard on the latest visible reported attacks. So the ones that make the press are the ones that are often quite externally visible to customers, having frontline impacts. But there'll be organizations that are facing potentially more severe but internal cybersecurity incidents that we might never know about. So that's why it's often distracting to focus on just what's in the headlines. And we should always observe and take lessons, but we should also look at this through the lens of our own organisations, because our own risk will look completely different to an organisation in a different sector. And even in the sector, organisations have different approaches, different strategies, different risks, different products. So whilst it's really helpful to understand the wider threat and what's going on at the moment, actually we should always look at that through the lens of our own organisation and not switch priorities too quickly in light of a new incident. And I think this again serves as a really important reminder. We're seeing the incidents across the sectors, but with very different impacts. And I don't know too much about the specifics of each of these incidents, but I imagine that it often comes down to the basics, getting the basics right. Because what I do know about these incidents is that the commonality of social engineering was really, really important. And that was the first line of defense. So if you get into an organization through potentially a social engineering attack, it then goes down to containing the lateral movement and the blast radius of that initial attack vector. And that's most often determined by the defense in depth that's employed in an organization. So thinking about network segmentation, speed of detection, and again, back to our well-exercised response plans and containment plans particularly. So yes, it's important to take stock of external events, but make sure that we're looking at that in an organizational risk picture and going back to basics, that you can't overstate the importance of getting the basics and consistently applying the fundamentals across networks. And then that again goes back to your reactive point. This moves an organization into a proactive readiness posture as opposed to waiting, unfortunately, for an incident that then moves priorities in a different direction.
In a previous podcast, you said, and I really like this, is cybersecurity is everyone's job. How do you think organizations can bring that kind of culture shift?
So culture shift is never easy, right? It's difficult, and particularly with something as complex as cyber. But trying to embed that the mindset that cybersecurity is everybody's job is an important one. And it's not a one size fits all approach. It's a mix of training, awareness, and clear accountability and leadership buy-in. Really importantly, first and foremost, thinking about getting awareness and training across the organization. And it's something that I struggled with when I came into the private sector. It was a real eye-opener to realize that not everybody thinks about cybersecurity every day. I have been indoctrinated into the cybersecurity industry, and it is a huge passion of mine. So for me, I think about cyber more often than I'd like to admit. And I forget that it's not on everybody's agenda every day. People just go to work to do their best and get the job done. Cybersecurity can often be seen as something extra on already a large workload. So to win those kind of hearts and minds, we'd love to do that, but it takes time and patience. Unfortunately, when it comes to things like training, the kind of stick approach is sometimes best. Having to mandate training and measuring training coverage across an organization is a really effective measure, and making it a key performance requirement. See, health and safety and fraud training is completely embedded in part of new trainer and annual review cycles. Cybersecurity should sit alongside that in all organizations, and that not only builds awareness in employees, but it also signals that leadership and the organization culturally care about cybersecurity as much as those other really important topics. So leadership plays a huge role here too. So people need to see visible good security behavior and know what it looks like for their role and within their local teams. So awareness and training can only go so far. When you think about cybersecurity, often sits quite separately from IT, but organizations that are more mature will have the IT functions and cybersecurity functions really closely aligned. So thinking about embedding cybersecurity in core technology processes, it's really important that we assure systems appropriately, depending on the criticality of the system. Having the right level of assurance, be that annually or every major release, is tested and monitored appropriately. And that's when you see real increase in cybersecurity maturity. It's when security is not just bolted on at the end, it's baked into how we build and operate technology. And then that reduces friction between IT teams and cybersecurity teams and builds a sense of shared responsibility and back to that culture where cybersecurity is a part of everybody's job. And I suppose something else that's really powerful is storytelling. So celebrating security wins and learning constructively together from mistakes and vocalizing cybersecurity as part of that awareness piece, but also framing it as a collective responsibility.
So, Lauren, you've been very vocal about the importance of diversity in cybersecurity. What have you done or seen work really well to help build high-performing and inclusive teams?
So when it comes to building high performance teams, it's acknowledging that cybersecurity is a team sport. Whilst we've got excellent experts in different areas and real deep subject matter expertise, it's the collective effort that really, really matters. And yes, skills and qualifications matter, but for me, diversity of perspective is so much more important. And I think that's because being so focused on cyber incident management, having the A team show up when needed, really need diversity of thought. And groupthink is the last thing that you want in a cyber incident response. And like I say, when it comes down to qualifications, we all have pretty similar these days. The real differentiator often comes down to the lived experience that we have in our careers, and that's not just length of experience. I'm not one that believes in time served. It's how you spend that time, not the length of, that really matters. I think people have such different approaches to solving problems and how they collaborate with each other, and that's where ensuring the right mix is applied. And diversity can only strengthen teams, and ensuring that when you're proactively hiring for people, that you're filling key gaps in the team, not just necessarily key, technical skills gap, but also potentially other skills gaps. And a really powerful exercise that we did recently as a leadership team was look at the DISC personality types. So for those that haven't heard of DISC, it's another personality model that puts people in kind of color-coded boxes, which I know boxes aren't necessarily always a great way to look at people, because we're much more complex than that, but it's a way of categorizing how we kind of show up most naturally when it comes to collaboration. And you've got the reds that are drivers, the greens that are supporters, the blues that are really detail-orientated analysts, and yellows that are the enthusiastic, connecting others and socializing things. And it's really fascinating to see how each of those styles show up in different ways, and each have such a crucial role that no one is better than another. And it's about having the right mix of those personalities that complement each other to pull the team in the right direction, because you wouldn't want a team that was weighted in too many analyzers that are really down in the detail, but no one's taken any action. Or, you wouldn't want a team full of reds, the drivers that are so focused on results and outcomes, because they might miss, key detail that the blues have seen, or they may not be thinking about how they could maximize on relationships that the greens have. It's really a collective team effort across, personality style, as much as it is any other potentially more visible characteristic that we see when we talk about diversity. And again, that comes back to myself. I'm a woman, a young woman in cybersecurity, and that by its nature puts me in the minority. But I think what I do show up as, and what I bring outside of the visible characteristics, is that I started my career as an apprentice, and that gave me a really broad, well-rounded foundation of knowledge that I got from learning from real experts. That set me up in a way that potentially a university experience would have given me something different. And having most of my career in government, again, has definitely shaped my thinking. I've operated in high security environments, so that has a different perception, a different lens than potentially someone that's worked in a non-regulated environment, where security is something that is potentially thought about last, or that isn't necessarily as taken as importantly as it is in the highly regulated industries. I'm somebody that really prioritizes networking, and that's not a given. It's something that I really go out of my way to make sure I make time for, quite consciously, and that really brings something else. My desire to connect with people and see this as a community problem, it's an industry problem. It makes me broader, learning from others' experiences. So yes, I'm a woman in technology, particularly cybersecurity, and that is a minority, but I think the real value that I add is my diversity of experience that I've got in my last decade of experience across cybersecurity.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that. I'm sure people will find that really inspirational, especially people who are just starting out in their cybersecurity career. I want to thank you for your time, Lauren. It's been really, really insightful. Really, just to kind of summarize what you've spoken about, it's really understanding the need for structure, prioritizing those roles within an organization, framing collective responsibility as well. But also the interesting part that I thought as well was celebrating, cybersecurity wins, and when everything, all that hard work that you've been putting into practice for, it could be years, it could be months, really starts to pay off. So thank you very much for your time.